Welcome to Goldfish on Games and Cover Disc Face Off, where in February of 1992 we have entered the post-holiday gaming slump, and the magazines are finding it a little hard to fill their discs. So let's see what they can put up as we look at Amiga Power, Amiga Action, and See You Amiga. Fight! Amiga Action is our first port of call, with 2 discs, 3 demos, and 3 PD titles. That first demo is for Wolfchild, a game that dared to ask the question, could we make Altered Beast more interesting? And I think the answer is yes, as you start off as a regular dude who can punch his way out of danger, but after finding some power-ups you transform into the Wolfchild, who can now throw fireballs. And quite a few different types of fireballs as well. As you travel through the level there are monsters to fight and trees to climb, all with the help of these float pads, as well as walkers. The movement is a little interesting as there's some amount of momentum. You'll slow down as you go up the hills and then speed up when you go down. It didn't seem to be affected if you were the wolf or the human, and you will return to it every so often if you take too much damage. That tends to lead to taking more damage as that punch is very limited and the baddies that are hitting you are far away. This level appears to be custom and based on the second one from the final game. And it's relatively large enough that there's a timer that can get in your way. Or at least it felt like there was a timer, I might have just died and not noticed. But it's also a demo that you have to reset the entire computer and then reload the demo if you want another go. I've never been a fan of those style of demos, they're really annoying. But I do think this is quite an interesting title, and the demo does a good job showing it off. The second demo is for the Pacific Islands, the sequel to Team Yankee. This is a tank sim, in which you control multiple units to complete a mission, one that is unique to the demo. To play the game you have 4 views for each battalion of tanks, and you give orders via the map, and then you can just let them head off. You can either continue to watch them via the map, or you can see all that's going on from a first-person 3D rendered view, which is a little slow on an Amiga 500, but that was to be expected for the time. You can switch to full screening a group if you want a better view of what's going on, and that will be needed once you get into a firefight, as that tends to happen at quite a distance, with you controlling where you aim and fire. Now, I've never been great at these types of games, even though I do enjoy messing around with them. And I don't tend to get too far, as there is a chance that I might shoot my own tanks because I spotted something in the distance. Well done. There are quite a lot of tactics that you'll get to deal with here, from firing off artillery to using smoke screens. There's even mines. Or you can just try and rush through the trees and take them unaware. Let's dive into a bit of PD, and we start with a classic that's shown up a few times before. It's Missile Command, which is a clone of Missile Command. The time they didn't waste on coming up with a new name was spent on making this a very close copy to that arcade title, all running in high-res mode, so it looks very sharp, and it plays great, even if it is a little basic. You'll have to shoot down the regular missiles, which you'll have to envelop in an explosion, and later on you'll also have to deal with cruise missiles that you'll have to hit dead on, otherwise it just pushes them off course, all while protecting your cities along the bottom of the screen, with obviously a limited number of your own missiles to do the defending with. It's a great clone of a fun game. The second PD title is Amiga Invaders. And it doesn't take much to work out this is a Space Invaders clone, and one that really isn't pushing the abilities of the Amiga to its limit. It plays well enough, as there are working bases that you can shoot through and a full range of invaders to attack. Not to mention that UFO that flies across the screen every so often. It also has simple sounds that go along with the very simple visuals. If you wanted a quick and basic version of Space Invaders, then this is a decent enough implementation. And the final PD title from Action is Bally 2, a take on the Quicks arcade game, where you'll have to capture parts of the screen all while avoiding the flying balls, which has to replace the line-based Quick of the original arcade game. Now these tend to bounce around far quicker, so you'll have to be very careful at when and how you want to make your incursion into the centre area. Capturing areas will not take out those dots, instead they will continue to bounce around inside that held area. This means that you'll have to avoid them while moving around there as well. As a PD title made back in 1989, this is a fun little game, even if it does show its age with how basic some of its presentation is. But it has everything you want out of a PD game, and that is some fun gameplay. We round out this magazine with another demo, and this is for Double Dragon 3. This is based on the arcade game called the Rosetta Stone, rather than the NES one that was called the Sacred Stones. And it's not often that we get a demo that actually has the intro sequence, or asks you to sit and wait nicely as it thinks and loads. Once we get in game, we find one that looks fine enough. It's not amazing, but it's not the worst graphics I've ever seen. But it does feel very stiff with its animations and movements. I've not played the arcade game, so I couldn't say how it compares. So if you know, let me know in the comments. But I have to guess that the single button joystick might be holding this back slightly, as you need to press both fire and up to jump. There also doesn't seem to be too many moves, so the jump kick seems to be the best thing to spam to take on the surprisingly tough early enemies. Now this is just the first level, with only 2 baddie types to take on, so there's not much here, even if there is a limited shop where you can spend your coins to give you a few extra basics. Now there's no music and very little in the way of sound effects, which I'm hoping is just an issue with it being a demo rather than being indicative of the final title. It's not a great demo, and I get the sense that this might be what the full game is like, and it's one that I would probably skip. Let's move on to the second magazine, See You Amiga, which across its 2 discs had a few demos, some PD software and games, as well as a few other interesting bits. The first demo is for John Madden's Football, not a game you would normally associate with the Amiga, as it's an American football title, or at least that's what we call it over here. You might not be shocked to hear that I don't really know all that much about this sport. The most I do know of it comes from a Game Boy title that I played decades ago. I know you need to try and get the ball down the other end of the pitch, and to do that you need to make plays. But selecting these is a little funky, as it's clear that this was a port from the Mega Drive,
First down!
as each one has a letter corresponding to the original controller. But here you need to hold down the fire button and then select a direction and then release. But it doesn't seem to work all that well. It doesn't feel responsive at all. When you're running around, it seems okay, if not the fastest game I've ever played. But then I don't tend to play too many sports titles. And this is really one that I wouldn't return to. So let's move on to our first oddity of the episode, Mandanim. This is a tool not for just making Mandelbrots, but it allows you to draw a series of boxes to turn it into an animation. This will obviously take a while to render, but what is quite cool is the eventual result will just be a series of images that you can play back in something like Deluxe Paint. Continuing with the image theme, there is a picture of the month, which is a very nice snowy landscape to fit in with the theme of it being February, even if I've not seen any real snow in quite some years. The final program for this disc is PicBase, a program for organising and cataloguing your images. Thankfully there are a few of these on the disc that we can get it to load, and it will give you this bar along the top that you can scroll along, which lets you see black and white versions of the images at a glance. You can then double click on one to see the full picture. You can also give these images comments and then sort by various types, or even do searches. It's an interesting and quite powerful image viewer, but not something that I would have found all that useful back in the day, as I didn't have too many images outside of the doodles I did in DPaint. So let's move on to the second disc, that starts us with another demo. This is for Guy Spy, a game that seems to be very nicely animated, and will actually play itself if you leave it alone on the title screen. This confused me for a bit, as I wasn't sure if this was an interactive demo or not. It was only after checking the magazine that it said you can control it via the joystick that I then managed to have a go. And yes, you can directly control the spy and move it around the cable cart to try and shoot at the enemies that's on the other side, even if you mostly block your view of them when you try to move around and shoot. This was made by the developers that ported the Bluth-style interactive cartoons like Dragon's Lair, and they wanted to use what they'd learned to make a more playable game. Now there is more interaction than the previous titles, but it is still lacking something. It could be interesting to check out if they manage to make this far more smoother to play in the final release, and while the demo has sold me on their ability to make a nice looking and animated game, but it's not completely managed that when it comes to the gameplay, as it still feels quite stilted. We get one last bit of software in the form of Textra, which they called in the magazine a word processor, but I feel it's more like a basic text editor instead. Not that that's a bad thing, as quite often all you want is a simple text editor, as you need to edit those startup sequence files, and using ed isn't always fun. It has all the basics like cut, copy, paste, as well as searching. This would have been really useful to have back in the day, even if there is better tools that replace it now. And we come on to the final PD game of the magazine, Tanks. A game we've also seen before, but it was fun enough that it's great to see it again. This is similar to Scorched Earth, or a 1v1 Worms game, as you have a randomly generated landscape with two tanks that have to try and take each other out. You do that by setting the power and angle of your attack, and then you gotta try and hit each other. There are a few options to mix it up, as you can have wind or gravity changed, or you can add in other random things like fans and pullers and pushers that will blow and move the bullet around as it's flying through the air. There's even these targets that if you hit it, you'll manage to get an extra free shot on your next turn. That can be very useful when trying to take out your enemy, and you got just close but not close enough. And if you do think the enemy's getting a little bit too close for comfort, then you can actually move your tank around a little bit. Or if you think the angle that you need to fire at is impossible, this can help you out in those situations. It's one of those games that I would have played so much with my mates back in the day. Now there was meant to be one other bit of software on this disc, based on the pages of CU Amiga, as it claimed it also included Disk Master, but you won't find it anywhere on the discs, or even mentioned on the labels. As it turned out, they messed up and didn't include it, so you're going to have to wait for the next issue if you want to get a copy of it. The final magazine is Amiga Power, who might have been struggling really hard this month to try and fill up their disc, as all they have is 3 PD titles. The first being Mr. Wobbly Legs vs. the Invaders from Space. And you might think that this is just a Space Invaders clone, and well, it is, but with a twist. At first you have to run back and forth collecting the stars, and then hitting the switch. This is because only high-ranking officers can use the weapons to hit back at the aliens, and risking your life is how you get promoted. And once you've got your required rank, you then have to repeat the process to upgrade your eventual craft. Now this might be to fire faster bullets, auto-fire, or even have multiple ships. But eventually you will succumb to the stream of champ lasers that is being thrown at you. And then if you manage to get promoted, you'll be able to take the fight back to them. This is full of weird sound effects and silly gameplay, but it is an interesting take on Space Invaders, and better than the one that we got to see before. It might actually be one of the more unique takes I've seen on this game in quite a while. Next we have Raid, a shoot-'em-up construction kit game. And one that shows what you can do with this software if you put a lot of effort in, as everything is nicely animated and they even pull off a few fancy tricks. Like the tank that's going across this bridge, it gets covered up. Now normally that would not be possible as you only have a background layer, so I think they're using fake baddies to make that work. But with quite a lot of shoot-'em-up construction games, it has a problem, and that is its difficulty level. This is a true Amiga shoot-'em-up, as everything takes a large number of shots to destroy. Now in other games, this wouldn't be too bad a problem, as you know you'd get a power-up later, but here, there's nothing, as Suke does not support upgrades. So those missiles you get at the start is what you'll be firing at the end of the game. But difficulty gripes aside, it is quite cool to see that on the second level they went with completely different tile work. So they really did put a lot of time and work into this title.
Bonus.
And the final PD game of the magazine is Squamble, and it's the only title we've seen so far to have music. Now this is a take on the game Scramble,
Get ready.
and it's not one that's pushing the graphics hardware of the Amiga all that much, with its very chunky looking craft and single colour terrain and items. The basic goal is just to make it to the end, but you will have to shoot at the fuel as you'll need to top up your reserves. You fire your main guns and bombs at the same time as it's using the single joystick button. And all while doing this, you'll have to avoid the ground, as that is deadly. The game seems fine enough, if a little basic, as we get to fly through tunnels later on and we have to shoot at missiles and other random things that bob around. The whole thing, yeah, it is fine, but it's not really wowing me. And I think Amiga Power could have done so much more this month. And there we have it, 3 more magazines done. And where do they rank? Well, it was a bit of a hard one to call this month, as they weren't the best selection we've ever seen. But in last place, it's Amiga Power. Mr. Wobbly Legs was a fun spin on an old classic, but the rest, they weren't up to much. In second, I'm going to give it to CU Amiga. Some interesting software, but I wouldn't be racing out to buy those games. So that just leaves Amiga Action in first. I think I had a bit more fun with those demos. And so, what do you think? Did I get it wrong? Do you agree with me? Let me know in the comments. And until next time, I was the Goldfish, that was Mr. Wobbly Legs, and this was Goldfish on Games. Thanks for watching. I do hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, then there should be a few videos on the screen that you can check out right now, as I've been doing these cover disc face-off videos for a few years now. I also review Amiga games and other platforms, so you might want to check some of those out.